The Evolution Security Podcast.
Hello, everyone. We would like to welcome John Hearne to the show. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great tonight.
Glad to have you here. And just a little warning here, everybody. I am dealing with the Chinese cold virus. So I tested positive last week, and luckily it's just been a cold. I haven't been taken to the hospital and put on a ventilator, and I don't plan on it. But just a warning. Now, John, let's just start out with a couple of real important questions we have from a good friend of ours. And let's just say this. How do you feel when you get to talk to Lee Weems and Eric Gelhaus on the phone?
Oh, it is without a doubt one of the greatest thrill of my life. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to meet presidents of the United States. I have, took a whole class with Jeff Cooper, and that stuff largely pales in comparison to being able to hang out with Lee Weems and Eric Gelhaus.
Awesome. Well,
we figured you felt that way because, man, that's what we feel like as well. We're always excited and giddy when we get to talk to Lee and Eric. So,
yeah, just
pretty cool.
Tears of joy a lot of the time. Now, also, what is it that you have against Brahms?
So, dude, I love ice cream. I do. I have tried many ice creams along the way, and Brahms has consistently disappointed me. And, their chocolate mint chocolate chip, which is my personal favorite, is much more like a candy cane kind of mint thing, and it does not do it for me. And the chocolate was just weak. I mean, I might have sent photos of me just dropping it in the trash can because I reached the point in my life where, when I go to eat something, I got to figure it's got to be, the workout. It has to be so good that it's worth the workout I have to put in to pay off for it. And I sent pictures of me like dropping a weak chocolate ice cream cone into the trash can. Because I tried. I've given it multiple attempts, and there's just so many other things I would rather eat than Brahms. I'm not saying it's the world's worst ice cream. I'm just saying that one can do better.
Well, John, I'd like to warn you. Cecil Birch has told us that he's probably going to choke you out for all this bad mouthing of Brahms.
Well, to be fair, Cecil owes me so many chokeouts at this point for me running my lips off. Dude, he could choke me out like 30 times, and I would still probably be in his debt. One time when we're offline, I'll tell you about what I did to his name tag one day. But, Cecil owes me many, many chokeouts, and it'll just be one of many that I have to pay.
Well, and FYI, if just as long as I start feeling better, I'll be hanging out with Cecil this weekend. So
I'm sorry.
But I have to ask this, John. Not even the hamburgers are any good at Brahms?
Oh, I don't have any objections to the hamburgers per se. I mean, a good burger is a good burger. I just don't get like the raving lunaticness. And to be fair, it's like the whole, if I'm going to go, I guess, controversial, I'll go controversial early. It's like, to be fair, I've only eaten in Whataburger outside of the great state of Texas, but I just haven't been that impressed with Whataburger as far as a burger, dude. There's, again, much better burgers. If you want to come up to Memphis sometime, I'll take you to the place that has the deep fried burger. You have not lived till you have had, in fact, a deep fried burger cooked in the same grease they've had since 1912.
Well, you're on the top of our list to train with anyway, so maybe that'll be a good opportunity. And I will ask you this though, since we're on the subject of good burgers, and we can kind of move on to the more serious content. Is then how about compared to Ron's burgers in Oklahoma? Cecil, myself, and Aaron, the last day he was on the ground, we had Ron's, and that's kind of a childhood favorite of ours. Have you had those burgers?
I don't know if I had Ron's. When we were doing TACCon in Tulsa, I happened to find this local burger joint that was phenomenal. I'd gone to the Walmart with my wife, and a couple of years later, I would realize that was the Walmart featured in the most dangerous Walmarts of the world kind of thing. But it was like this little hole in the wall burger joint right by the worst Walmart in Tulsa. And those were some damn good burgers. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, what Beavers build, but they were some really good burgers. So,
and I'm going to guess which Walmart that is, but I think it would be about 21st and Memorial. It's either that one or the 71st and Lewis, like right across the street from a place I play gigs at all the time. It's the nexus of crime right there. Well,
it was an interesting neighborhood. I like it. Well, there's not much else in Tulsa. It was like, we just literally popped in, we're there for TACCon. Like, well, what's the nearest Walmart to, we were staying out by the airport. And, we'll just go to this Walmart and grab what we need real quick. And, while we're here, it was kind of funny because you could tell it's an interesting place. It had been there forever. It closed. It was like, there was a great movie in the late 90s, early 80s where like the neighborhood is infested by vampires and everything frantically shuts down as the sun goes down. And that's exactly how that place was rigged up. There were bars on the window, and they weren't going to be there after the sun set on them. That was for sure. But in the daytime, by God, you could get a good burger.
Well, if you were close to the airport, shoot, that would put you close to Admiral and or north of Admiral. So yeah, then starting to point towards North Tulsa, maybe. Well, Aaron, what you think, man?
Yeah, let's get into the meat, buddy.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's get some.
Well, we've conquered all the important issues already. I'm not sure what else could possibly be left.
Well, we'll try.
Well, John, for our audience members that may not know you, can you go ahead and give us a bio, please?
All right. So back in 1969, my father loved my mother, and I was produced. Between 1970 and I guess now or so, I've spent my life in a couple of interesting places. I like to joke that I have an interesting dual career track, and that I kind of started down the academic road and got sidetracked. Grew up in a public safety family, did volunteer fire EMS growing up, got hired on and started doing law enforcement in 1992 when real men still carried stainless steel 357 Magnum revolvers. Have maintained that law enforcement career up until today. I also had picked up along the way my master's degree in criminal justice to risk consulting everybody. It was I call it a real master's degree because it wasn't it required a research project. I've done peer reviewed research, that kind of thing. It wasn't a comprehensive exam program where you're done. So I graduated in 96, and I learned a lot of it. The master's degree hasn't helped me per se, but all the tools that I picked up along the way have proven to be really, really useful. So while I've been doing the kind of the academic nerdy side, actively serving law enforcement officer, I've also been teaching with Tom Gibbons, a Rangemaster, since I think it was 2001 when I started. You can do the math now, but that sounds a lot like 20 plus years now. So I learned a lot with Tom. I helped Tom with a ton of road classes around the country. We probably traveled to half the states in the U.S. I'd say that I probably learned more riding to and from classes with Tom and just kind of getting to talk and pick his mind than anything else. So it's been a circuitous route to get me here, but here I am.
Well, Tom's an amazing person. Aaron and I are new instructor development course graduates. And yeah, it's been an amazing experience learning from Tom. I imagine that all the time that you spent with him has been really incredible.
Full of.
What I think this was important about Tom's program is that you guys are graduates. There are people who attend the class every year and don't make it, and you can tell he has a serious program because it has a failure rate. I think it runs about 15% these days. The most recent class I helped him with was actually a little higher than that and stuff like that. But it's one of the few credentials in especially the private citizen side of the shooting world that you can actually fail, and people show us that every year.
Yeah, we're extremely proud. I'm not going to lie. I felt I was prepared. I knew Aaron was prepared as well. We have to have that mindset. But I will tell you, we're about the mental preparation side of things, and I did a lot of visualization, getting through that class before I took the class, and that helped keep the nerves down and whatnot. I was certainly not one of the top shooters, but I think I did just fine. But it was amongst some incredible shooters like Eric Gelhaus was the top gun, And then, of course, Tim Hearne was there. Man, it was awesome to shoot with those guys. As a matter of fact, they were two of the coaches that I teamed up with. And you may have heard us talk about this, but I joked with both of them. I was like, hey, you guys aren't giving me much time, or excuse me, much repetition in learning how to coach, But yeah, it was an excellent experience. I know Aaron had a great time as well, and we're looking forward. Aaron, are we taking the advance in April or June?
June, bro. Yeah.
Okay.
Down at
I keep thinking April for some reason.
Yeah, it's down at Carl Wren's joint.
Yeah, man.
It's funny. I was literally just at Carl's this weekend, hanging out with him.
Didn't you take the Force on Force instructor class?
I did his Force on Force instructor class years ago. He actually came up, and when Tom still had the fixed facility in Memphis, I did it there. And I've been with TacCon since pretty much, I want to say 2003 was probably my first TacCon. I haven't missed one since. I mean, last year I had to do my presentation remotely, but I was certainly there in spirit. But for years, Carl did Force on Force as an aside at the TacCon. So I've got to experience Carl's stuff, and he's definitely one of the best in the business.
Well, forgive me. It was actually two other folks that we've done some work with in the past that took that class over the weekend. So forgive me. I misspoep.
I know a couple of those folks, and you'll admit to hanging out with anybody.
Jeez.
Well, what I will say, and we'll move on to picking your brain, is that Aaron and I are definitely going to be getting to Carl's classes as well, which we'll kind of talk about further in the show. Let's talk about Keeper's Concealment. They are the original authority on appendix holsters and appendix training, offering high-performance handgun training, specializing in concealed carry performance. Keeper's Concealment is also a proud affiliate of CCW SAFE, the truly proven legal service membership company offering dedicated legal defense. Heaven forbid you're forced to use lethal force. Use code KC10OFF and check them out at ccwsafe.com/keepers. To buy a holster, sign up for a class, inquire about hosting a course, or join CCW SAFE, you'll find it all at keepersconcealment.com. Let's go ahead and segue. I will tell you, first off, I'll digress 1 second, this has been a long time coming, John. We feel silly that we haven't invited you on just as of yet, but it's great to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here. I'm just, I'm hurt and wounded that you managed to get Gelhaus and Weems on here first. I'll never hear the end of this yet again.
Yeah, we actually, John, we planned it that way on purpose, just so those two guys would have something else to gig you about.
Great. There are probably some cash bribes if I know those guys.
Maybe. Well, now on to the serious stuff here. So, we've been following you for a long time. I think I first heard you on the AWS show. What I will kind of push on is that you've definitely contributed hugely in the industry on the mental side. I mean, I've learned so much from you just listening to and reading some of your writing about how the mind works, how it develops skills, how we react to life or death stress. So yeah, you've got some amazing content out there. So let's kind of talk about both those areas. Let's split it up this way. So can you describe for our audience how the mind learns a new skill?
So when we talk about learning new skills, there's a couple of factors we have to consider. First off is, what is the skill that we're going to learn? And you can actually rate that skill, how difficult it is, on a scale that runs like, I believe it's 0 to 52 or 0 to 54. And that scale is called task complexity. So some things are very, very easy to learn. Some things are very complex to learn. So the first thing you have to understand when we're trying to learn motor skills or anything like that is how complicated is the skill itself. Obviously, the more complicated it is, the more time it's going to take to get it established. Overall, I would say when you're going to learn a motor skill, it's actually a 3-step process. And the problem is everybody forgets the next 2 steps. So the first thing you have to do is you have to develop the motor program. And developing a motor program, this is where everybody gets confused. Developing the motor program by itself does not take thousands of repetitions. A regionally gifted person, depending on the task, can learn a basic motor program in 300 to 500 repetitions. It's not that bad. And there's a very strong genetic influence in there. One of the things that drives me crazy sometimes is a lot of the guys, especially on the DT side of the house, are some really naturally gifted athletes with very high levels of kinesthetic intelligence. And they're probably just people that, if you look at them on the genetic scale, just learn motor skills more quickly and efficiently than everybody else. And they wonder why none of us can keep up. But, we have to develop that initial motor program. But when it's there, it's really only in much more of you can think of it as a short-term memory. And you also have to remember that any motor program that comes across the brain is always competing with other motor programs. So the brain, as soon as you stop using a motor program, will do its best to get rid of it. So when we're developing, we're trying to learn a motor program, we've got to develop the basic program itself. And then at the very least, we have to keep it from going away. We have to refresh that motor program to keep it around. And if it's a really important motor program, there's a 3rd step in there. And that is we have to automate that program. And when you hear the very, very high number of repetitions to, develop muscle memory and, those terms along those lines, that's what they're talking about. So it's this 3-step process of learn, retain, and then automate. And the automating is the bugaboo. It's going to take thousands of repetitions to do that. And this is the other thing that frustrates so many people is it's repetitions over time. Yes, I realize the acronym for that is ROT, but it really is repetitions over time is what matters. If we were to do high resolution 3D brain scans, I used to say my 8-hour talk, but it's running a lot like 9 hours talk. There's a great study where they taught people the novel motor program of juggling, right? And they did very high resolution brain MRIs once they've learned to juggle, and then about 3 months afterwards. And what nobody seems to appreciate is it takes physical changes to your brain. There are actually physical changes that take place over time, primarily this process called myelination. That is what allows that process to automate. And to a large degree, there's obviously going to be points of diminishing return, but you can keep refining that motor program into perpetuity. There's a reason we call Rob Latham the great one, because he's been developing those same essential motor programs for decades now, right? So he has a very, very high level of automaticity with those motor programs, and just makes everything look really, really easy. So, the whole motor program process, again, it's a 3-part process, and everybody wants to do the first one, right? They want to go to a weekend class, develop the motor program real quick, but nobody wants to make sure it doesn't go away. And then very few people want to do the repetitions that it's going to take to automate that program.
Well, John, if I can make a comment on that very issue, and I don't want to beat up on some of the folks that have come through some of our classes. I mean, and I always like to say this caveat: we don't hold a candle to you guys in the industry. We're new in this business, but one of the things that bugs me is towards the end of our main 8-hour class, which is it's just a defensive pistol course. With what we believe, and of course we're teaching curriculum that we've learned from our mentors, with some of our own takes on it. But towards the end of the class, we will say, okay, all the drills that we've done in this class up to this point, now we're going to talk about dry fire. Every single one of the drills that we did, those are now your dry fire regiment. So, and then we provide them a dry fire safety protocol, so they don't shoot through their wall or worse, and then say, use the exact drills that we provided you throughout the course, and now that's your practice. Because if you don't make payments on what you've learned here, you're not going to develop further, and you may actually digress from what you developed during the course. So, and then I'll ask some of the students in the future, like, hey, you guys been dry firing? And it's like half of them aren't dry firing. I guess some folks just, it takes them a while to understand that that's how they get better. But I mean, you have more experience teaching. Do you find that a little bit frustrating and find that with some of your clients?
Well, so first off, I mean, it's frustrating, but it's lucrative. I'll put it that way. How's that for honesty?
Hey, there you go.
But I can't tell you how many times, especially when I was, I used to travel almost every month with Tom, and you'd see the same people every year. You'd go to the same venue, and they would be just as bad as when you saw them last time, and you'd spend the first day getting them tuned back up. And a lot of, we're Americans, we like to buy solutions. So a lot of people think the solution is just to buy a class. And, kind of like you were alluding to, all you've done is make a down payment in a class. And if you make a down payment on a car or a down payment on a house and you don't make the follow-up payments, you're going to eventually lose it. And then when you do get back into it, you're going to be right back at ground zero. And I think that's kind of the mark of a credible program, is that sustainment training is included in the instruction. And I've been really terrible about this. I have a really simple dry practice program that I run. It's just on a PowerPoint that's very portable. You don't have to buy a shot timer or anything like that. And I keep promising everybody I'm going to put it up for free on my YouTube channel. And well, I've reserved a YouTube channel, but I've yet to upload a video yet. So I'm hoping in the near future that my response in class is, when we talk about skill sustainment, go watch the YouTube video, download the PowerPoint, and just do that. Because it's the repetitions over time. I know it's not an exciting acronym there. You got to get your brain rot going on, but it really is spending those repetitions over time to buy, buy the skills and hold on to them. And everybody wants, again, the quick answer, nobody wants to do the work longer, or very few people want to do the work long term. That's why the people that actually bother to do the work seem to really stand out.
Makes sense, and what we've seen, and frankly, that's what we try to emulate the folks that are successful. So that's why we believe in that. So, segueing into the mental side of dealing with life or death stress, can you describe to the audience how your mind deals with that?
So I think going back, the answer is by default not all that well. The brain is very wired to be protective of itself. It doesn't like situations it hasn't seen before. We tend to call those novel situations. And one of the things the more recent research has kind of blipped on, it doesn't like unexpended calorie expenditures, and it doesn't like losing its balance. Those are like some major watch out areas for the brain that we can use to our advantage. But going back to that original question, how people handle stress, the truth is not very well, unless they prepared for it. Now, there's a small percentage of people out there. The experts disagree about the number, but it's probably between 10 and 20% of the population are probably more naturally wired to be survivors. And that shouldn't dissuade you, because that's the whole purpose of training. Jeff Cooper famously said that the purpose of training is to turn non-copers into copers. And that's ultimately where we need to be heading toward. So, the brain is always on the lookout for situations where it might be imperiled. So, when it gets that first sensory input, and again, it doesn't matter which sense that comes from, that something's wrong, its first reaction is going to be to prepare to fight. So it's going to release a little bit of adrenaline. You may get a little anxiousness, that little butterfly in the pit of your stomach that something isn't right. That's going to be the first clue. And again, this is assuming a more ongoing building kind of activity. And once it realizes that life and death may in fact be on the line, if it's anything, looks serious, the first thing the brain wants to try to figure out is, how bad is this, right? And how bad it is going to have a variety of components built in there, such as, are we trying to solve this in a tight time frame? Are we feeling fearful? Are we just anxious? What's our current state? There's all these kinds of, questions that the brain kind of runs. And for kind of the unwired person, the person that hasn't prepared themselves, if the answer to that is like, oh my God, we're about to die in this instance, the brain's going to revert to the what we call the emotional mind, the limbic system, and it's going to be limited to the processes of fight, flight, freeze, or posture, right? That's pretty much all it can do. The body will go through a recovery period from that. And if the problem has not been solved by those basic responses, then we're pretty much probably dead at that point, right? Because, those natural solutions only work really, really well with natural problems. So, if it's the brain says, oh my God, how bad is this? And the brain goes, well, it's not that bad, I think we can handle it. Then the rational mind tends to stay in charge, and we can analyze, we can think, we can execute, that sort of thing. So that's pretty easy. The middle ground there between those two, right? If it looks like it's pretty bad, but we're not under a super time crunch, the brain is going to ask itself, hey, are we still in control here? And control isn't what we necessarily think it might be. It's basically, do our current abilities match or exceed the problem we're facing? And again, if the brain goes, oh no, we are vastly overscaled here, that we're going to lose badly here, then it tends to revert to that emotional brain. And we see people panicking, all the stuff you associate with people not well, responding well under stress. On the other hand, if it says, hey, I think we are in control, and a lot of times control is driven by the unfolding reality matching the mental map the brain has, right? Have we seen this before? Have we won before? That kind of stuff. If that answer is, yeah, I think we're still in control, then you can generally stay rational, run your prepared responses, and try to, basically, work your way out of that situation. But a lot of that has to do with what how you prepared the brain in advance to deal with those possibilities. What you've told it's really, really bad. What is really, really bad to you is going to, there's going to be a genetic component. There's going to be a cultural component. There's going to be some upbringing, some deep psychology there. But in a nutshell, I think that would be a pretty good, 3-minute take on what happens to the brain under extreme stress.
Very, very good explanation, John. And for our audience out there, the reason we started this discussion in allowing John to elaborate on how some of these mental processes work. Now we want to move the discussion into, okay, how do we help with your brain developing proper decision making? So this next section of the show, we're going to move into the opportunity for John to help us with a lot of that as well. So, Aaron, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you. I know some of the subjects may seem a little bit disparate as we're discussing them, but they really, in my opinion, are cohesive and connect. So, Aaron, I'll pass to you.
Sure. Let's see how my voice holds together here. So, John, when it comes to firearms training, could you explain how important having to train in making decisions with that gun in your hand?
Well, there's how important it is to train and how important there is to train with decisions. And, I touched on this earlier about natural problems and unnatural solutions. We are apex predators on the face of the earth. We've put men on the moon, human beings occupy all the continents, that sort of a thing. And we haven't gotten here by accident, for sure, right? So part of that training is building the basic motor programs that you're going to need to use the tool, because the tool we're talking about is very unnatural. If we think about everything that goes into shooting a gun well, as a quick example, I think most of us are of the age where we've had the eye test for glaucoma, where they blow that air into your eye. And the question I always ask is, how many people like that? And of course, the answer is nobody likes that. That's one of those things that freaks the brain out because we're very sensitive about our eyes. Well, you encounter those exact same pressure waves when you're shooting firearms. And shooting a firearms well basically involves a lot of overcoming our natural tendencies. And you can only do that through repetition and showing the mind that basically, every time we pull the trigger, the world is not going to come to an end. So there's a lot of, assuaging, convincing, cajoling of the mind you have to do to make sure it understands, the gun isn't going to be, the gun will be useful and not a detriment, right? And you've got to have those basic motor programs in place. But, the big problem is that I always explain it this way, is there's skill and there's skill application. So a great example would be of a skill, something very common to us, the ability to draw and hit an 8-inch circle at 7 yards with a concealed handgun, right? And we'll set time standards for that. And we'll say, hey, when you're at 2 seconds, you're starting to get good enough to carry the gun in public. And, when you're below, 1.5 or below, you're doing really well. That's just a skill. The whole problem is that very rarely do we train for when to do that skill, right? And a lot of times, if you have somebody who's better at decision making, they can make up for lack of motor skills. So, for instance, if you got a guy that's really, really has a blazing fast draw stroke, let's say he's not cheating by using AIWB, he's got like a JIT 1.25 draw stroke. And you've got his friend over here that only has a 1.75 draw stroke. And we would laugh at that guy and ridicule him online because he's so slow. But if the guy with the 1.75 draw stroke can make a decision a second faster, all of a sudden he's at a vast advantage. So the mere development of motor skills is intriguing. And we tend to focus on the metrics we can measure most easily, right? I've heard one of my mentors quip that if we got rid of shot timers, then the majority of instructors wouldn't have anything to teach, right? We tend to get really focused on metrics we can measure, especially time. So The decision making is what we're missing. And because you're going to have to make decisions all the time. And, this is 2022. We see all kinds of super extra legal scrutiny on the decision to use a firearms. There's all kind of political dynamics that go with that. But, you can't be in a panic when you use your firearm. That decision to use force has to be rational, and it has to meet very specific guidelines that have been established by the courts.
So that kind of brings us to what is called your cognitive pistol class. Now, just without giving a lot away in the class, but could you give the listeners an idea of what that class entails?
So it's a different class. And in many ways, the cognitive pistol with tactical anatomy is the live fire complement to the who wins, who loses, and why lecture. I've been around the training industry for over 20 years, and most of what gets sold in the training industry is what can be offered most profitably, right? That involves shooting paper, maybe some steel, as in 24 shooters online if you're in like a real big cattle call class with a big name instructor, that kind of a thing. And the purpose of that class is to try to, I guess, for lack of better words, at least try to fix some of the shortcomings I've seen in other classes. So cognitive pistol, and it's actually cognitive pistol with tactical anatomy, it's not a class that's designed to improve your technical shooting ability. You come to the class with whatever technical shooting ability you have, and that should be to basically, you've got to be able to safely operate the gun. But almost every shot that's going to be fired in that class is going to require a decision. And there's a concept in the literature called cognitive load. And you really saw that when we were doing space launches and still sending men to the moon and that kind of stuff. And there's just limits to what the human brain can process at one time. A great example of cognitive load might be what we see in an airliner, an emergency or something like that. There's a lot of pilots that can handle one in-flight emergency, and they can handle that really well. Where you really start to separate the wheat from the chaff is when they start having multiple emergencies, right? When you've got a lot of information coming in, you've got to prioritize what's most important, prioritize actions, and go from there. And that's one of those skills that not that many classes emphasize. Number one, there's certain logistical issues with that. It's very hard to generate a start signal that isn't an audible signal because we all love shot timers. So what I kind of set out to do is I fully accept that there's when I say cognitive load, what I can generate, there's artificial cognitive load and what I would call like an organic or a natural cognitive load, right? So a natural cognitive load that not a lot of people want to work with is moving around other people with loaded guns. I consider that a basic skill, being able to safely maneuver around other people with a loaded firearm. But somehow we set it aside as some super advanced skill when we know that most guns around the house have to be accessed and then moved through the house, right? So safely moving with the gun around others would be a very natural cognitive load. There are other ways to put cognitive load on you. A great example of that is Tom Given's casino drill, where you have to shoot certain numbers a certain number of times. There's reloads in the order and stuff like that. So the whole purpose of the class is to make almost every shot you fire have a decision attached to it. One of the ways that I do that is I think, and I guess in 3 years, check in with me, I think I've come up with a way to fairly inexpensively recreate a lot of the 3D problems that you have in shootings, compressed time frames, understanding the 3D problem stuff like that, issues like that. So, one of the cognitive loads I'm going to put on you in the class is properly placing the shot on an actual 3D target. So, at the end, I've had some very good shooters who are like, oh my God, I've never had to think this much in a class before. And I'm like, well, great. And, I always, I took it as a great point of pride when I saw people that were amazingly gifted natural shooters. When you said, hey, draw and give me two, all of a sudden, I had increased their, shooting speed and increased their shot time 50% because they were actually having to legitimately stop and think, what they were doing before they pulled the gun out, which is realistically sounds a lot like the real world.
Yeah, that's
absolutely, John. Go ahead, Aaron.
I was just saying that sounds excellent. Excellent training.
Well, and I've heard you talk about that course before, John, and I'll kind of give a description of how I've been thinking of my own training. Aaron and I are, I've been training with Craig Douglas since 2010, multi-time alum in his ECQC and EWO classes. Aaron is a multi-time alum, which we're going to talk on Force on Force here just momentarily. But where I see that there is a market, and I think it's brilliant that you've been doing that, is there's this area of firearms training where it's hard to get people to do very physical force on force. But at the same time, I think your cognitive pistol course and your anatomy course and any kind of decisional type training is kind of a bridge in there that those of us that do force on force, we should be augmenting a lot of that training with that type of course. Would you agree that maybe there's this trifecta within training with a firearm that we've got, just like you stated, we've got the actual overlearned skills, I think is a term that I've heard you use before. And then you've got the cognitive load capabilities, and then you've also got the decision making and force on force. Would you agree that there's like kind of three areas that folks can really try to focus more on? Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And they're all important areas. What I would say is there's degrees of involvement. And what I would probably say is that there's a fundamental difference between a Craig Douglas class and I am ECQC alumni. I saw it wasn't the first, but one of the first live runs of that class at a Warrior Talk symposium back in the aughts. Wow. And I went through the class as a student. And then when Paul Gomez wasn't available, I was the Sims dummy for a class. So I have some passing familiarity with Craig's work. And, in a lot of ways, cognitive pistol is a great entry level. I think of tiers, there's all kinds of ways to put that cognitive load on people. And, to be fair, Craig's is the deep end of the pool, right? There's other ways to get that information, or at least get that experience started in people. And I like to think maybe I'll be a gateway drug, because I fully recommend Craig's class. I say, go train with Craig. He'll teach you how to do this stuff, because it's just, one of the things that people tend to forget is that they think that somehow life and death stress is different from another form of stress. And the analogy I use there is it's kind of like drinking water. You can either drink water from a water fountain or you can drink water from a fire hose. They're both the same fluid. They're both the same process, but the experiences are fundamentally different, right? So by learning to, maybe start drinking from the water fountain, when the fire hose comes along, it's not quite as bad. But chemically, at a neurobiological level, the process is the same. It's just a matter of degree. And any exposure you can get to that is going to have an inoculation effect that when your brain has to, ask those questions, how bad is this? Are we in control? It's going to be much more willing to stay in the rational mind and try to execute all this cool training that you've spent, all these hours, dollars, time, years, passion developing. It's part of the component. It would be tragic to have the skills and not have the ability to implement them in the moment.
Well, and that's why I'm honestly fascinated about your course and other courses that would move in that direction, because I feel like on the flip side of that, even though your course can be a gateway drug for, say, like an ECQC or, even Carl Wren's class, his force on force classes, but also on the flip side of that coin too, is that if people try to make sure that they're gaining time in courses like yours or even in, say, their drive practice, and I was going to hit on some areas in that here in a second. But to me, I feel like, man, if you can do both, the courses like yours can help you with decision making in Craig's class. Even if you've done it multiple times. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you just have to remember that everybody wants the easy bake oven kind of solution. And if you ever actually try to cook anything baked in an easy bake oven, you in fact know that it takes forever to cook something with that damn light bulb, right? But this is a lifelong process. Warriors aren't built in a 2-day a week, a 2-day weekend class. That's just not how that happens. You can probably teach some basic motor skills, get them shoved into short-term memory, but that person is not going to be able to remember how to do the skills, let alone implement them under stress, unless they're doing some work along the way. It really is a lifelong journey, and most people just want a quick solution for that.
Well, and John, that kind of segues into me mentioning I have developed, I would say to a amateur degree, some decisional drills that I've placed in my dry fire practice, and frankly, I'm pinching myself now because I've known about Shelley and Brian Hill's image-based decisional drills for some time. And when I was thinking about this aspect of my own training, I went on and ordered a set because it's like, why haven't I done that? And you know, can you describe, you know, how important even just placing something like that in your dry fire practice, and what do you think of their card system, their image-based decisional drills?
Well, first off, I have some significant experience with redheads, so I would never say anything to annoy or upset a redhead. So you have to understand that my sense of self-preservation is going to prevent me from saying anything bad about Shelley. But with that said, it's a really good program because the entry point is so low on it. Any of the other decisional drills that we commonly see done, like the classic example of that would be a video simulator. I mean, you know, the video simulator we use at my agency, we borrow somebody else's, you know, it's a $110,000 system. The image-based decisional drills are a much lower entry point into that decision-making process because, again, it doesn't matter how fast your draw stroke is if you can't make the decision to actually implement it. Or even worse, if the correct answer is to apply OC and not the gun, and you mix those two things up, you could be living with the consequences of that decision for the rest of your life, and you'll be doing it from a set of gray bars. So anything that's going to help you make those decisions, get your body used to making them under stress, is going to be of value. And the great thing about that whole process is that, you know, like I said, it's a very low entry point into that world. Because people don't even stop to think that I might actually have to make a decision before I shoot somebody. Just to, you know, I'm a nerd guy, facts and stuff like that. You know, everybody thinks that they carry a gun, and you have to remember the gun is a specialized piece of equipment. It's much like a parachute, right? Most of the time, or there's very few problems in this world that can be solved by a parachute. However, if you have a problem that requires a parachute, there is no other substitute that will do, and the gun is much like that. So. You know, everybody gets upset with the guns and stuff like that. But, you know, when you look at assaults, right, in this country, only about 20% of assaults are what we think of as aggravated assault, where you could justify using deadly force to defend yourself. So what are you left with? Well, you better have some really good empty hand skills, or you better have some man in a can, you know, a la OC, right? And a lot of people will go merely about their way thinking they're prepared for whatever comes down the pike, when the reality is they're only prepared for about 20% of what's going to potentially come down the pike, and they've left themselves open to the other 80% of the problem. So, and being able to make that decision as far as which tool you use is, yeah, exactly, it is huge.
Well, and John, I was going to comment on that. That is one of the aspects of their decisional drills that I thought is very important, is that they emphasize no shoot or don't shoot yet decisions, the use of OC spray, and that's the reason I figured I would. And Aaron did the same thing. I purposely carry my pepper spray with me all the time so that it is now a part of my process every single day, because I don't ever want to be without my OC spray, because I don't want to be caught in that predicament where I don't have a bridge between, you know, empty hands and a lethal weapon.
And Eric,
just something we want to push. Go ahead, Aaron.
And I like to explain to people, I mean, this is just a slight tangent, but you have empty-hand skills that most people don't have, you know, to an advanced degree, and you still don't feel like tangling with someone on the concrete, do you?
Nope. No, I would rather not do that. It's, you know, and again, once you go hands-on with somebody, you know, like Masad Ayub says, you know, it's a gunfight because I brought the gun there. I think Tom says something similar to that. And so that this, you know, the use of OC spray, to a lot of folks, unfortunately, the male ego, some men act like, oh, well, no, why would I carry OC spray? You know? So, yeah, I was wondering what your opinion was about there. I knew you likely had a high opinion of them. But again, this discussion, I wanted to really bring together, okay, how can people start somewhere with these crucial skills? And this is precisely what I was hoping we would get out of this.
Well, I'd say there's also there's some other low-hanging fruit we probably need to discuss. So I spend, 8-10 hours laying a foundation to kind of get to the end of my talk. And, real quickly, everybody thinks that training is about developing motor skills. And I put motor skills at about number 3 on our priority list. And I touched on it earlier. The mind hates stuff it hasn't seen before. It hates novel stimuli. So in my mind, the most important thing we can do to train, to prep our minds, is to make sure the situations that we are afraid that we're going to have to deal with, right, that they're not going to be novel to us, that we've seen them before. Next, we have to have, relevant mental maps. Then we can worry about motor skills. So there's there's value to be had in just watching criminal assault videos online. I mean, this is 2022. You can find a criminal assault at YouTube fairly easily, because most people that grew up, for lack of a better word, in a middle class or better upbringing, they're just not familiar with the speed of violence and how fast this stuff happens. I mean, these are events that are over in 3 seconds. And unless you've seen that speed of fight, for lack of a better word, it can be completely shocking to you. So, our first, low-hanging fruit is just to make sure that we've prepared a place in our head that evil exists in the world, right? And we need to see what evil, we have to be, I don't know if we're comfortable with what evil can do, but we can't be shocked by what evil can do. We don't want to stand there flat-footed and gape as somebody kills us. And that's one of the things that, drives me crazy when we look at law enforcement officers feloniously murdered in this country. It does vary from year to year, but, as high as 80% of those felonious murders took place without the officer ever drawing the gun, right? And that just speaks to me of a huge inability to prepare the mind, or a huge failure to prepare the mind, so that, the emergency life-saving equipment that you've hauled around for all these years might actually be used in a fight. It's not as easy as Hollywood would have us believe.
Well, I'd like to go off a little bit on witnessing how fast fights are and witnessing evil. I remember a video I saw not too long ago, and it was just a couple of guys that just faced off and were doing the chest against chest kind of thing. And one of the guys wasn't having it, and you didn't see it, but the guy poked a screwdriver right through the guy's heart before you even knew it. That guy didn't even know it happened. About 2 or 3 seconds later, he was flat on the ground, dead.
Yeah, and there's a great video I use in Cognitive Pistol because, first off, I'm a government trainer, so I cannot train people without a PowerPoint. Those are the rules in which I was raised, right? But I show a video from Brazil where a dude gets stuck in the, it's a street altercation. There's a very large individual confronting a smaller person, and the smaller person just straight up stabs him, one good shot in the throat, and then there's probably a couple of other stabs that were ineffective, but that first one was good enough. And you literally sit there and watch the guy's entire life content spray across the sidewalk, and that guy's done for in like 13 seconds. I asked the students to count thousands, right? People just don't have any idea how fast that actual initial assault can be, and that's why they're doing that. The criminals are going to prey on us. They're probably not the most skilled shooters. They're not, they don't spend years studying, knife craft in the Philippines or anything like that. They have very, very simple techniques. They'll have to adjust proxemics to get you close enough for their techniques to go. And that's why, some of Craig's work with the muck and stuff like that is so important, is that a lot of these criminal assault paradigms only work at certain distances. And if you can do something as simple as maintain distance, then you go a long way toward making yourself less likely to be a victim.
Well, John, I do have one digress to comment on what you spoke about, simple technique. I have a instructorship in mixed martial arts under Jeet Kune Do and Kali and all of that stuff. So I had years of all kinds of complex knife fighting that I learned, but I don't use any of that anymore. I've reduced it to mainly what Craig has taught. It's not necessary to have a lot of that. So to me, I think when it comes down to especially knife defense, the criminal doesn't have to have a lot to take you out, just like, Aaron said and you commented on. But it just made me think, it's like a lot of people will spend a ton of time learning crazy amounts of skills that are unnecessary. With that said, speaking, I love the term mental maps that you talk about so often. The the cognitive skills or cognitive pistol, and then moving or segueing into force on force. Talk to our audience about how mental maps, how you can develop mental maps through, say, force on force, and lend an opinion on what you believe force on force means to folks in this walk.
Well, the big thing is that when it comes to that whole flow that we talked about earlier, how bad is this, and are we in control? We have to essentially, if we're smart, and before the problem comes, is we feed the mind the desired outcomes we want to deliver. Right? We want to convince the mind that our plans are going to work and we're going to stay in control and everything's going to be okay. And it's not just my opinion, but there's a much larger growing body of research now that shows that force on force is the most effective mechanism for creating these motor programs. I'll mention this just because the numbers are handy in my head, but one of the studies that I talk about this weekend was a study where they created ambiguous situations for police officers. And these weren't clear-cut shoot, no-shoot decisions. The whole purpose of the study was to understand decision-making when the information isn't clear. And one of the things that was amazingly disconcerting is that the best performing department only shot the wrong person 24% of the time, right? The worst performing department shot the wrong person over half the time. And when the authors went in and said, because they had a pretty good sample size here, they compared departments. The department that had the lowest failure rate, those guys had at least one force on force scenario or more in the past 12 months. It was hugely insulating as far as allowing people to make sound decisions in split-second timeframes that we're talking about. There was another good study that came out that was published in Nature magazine that was done by a bunch of the guys at Navy Surface Warfare, showing the effects that stress inoculation training can have on improving decision making. These are, again, classic experiments where they're manipulating variables, they're measuring possible confounding variables along the way. So the body of evidence that says force on force is the best place to build a mental map is soundly out there. The only issue I see with force on force is that really good force, good force on force is hard to find. There's a lot of bad force on force, and good force on force, like I said, is few and far between. A lot of times the scenarios are either too hard, like they're impossible, they're Kobayashi Maru scenarios, or they're just way too easy, right? So you've got to have the appropriate difficulty as part of that. Part of the problem with force on force, though, is just the logistics associated with it. So, another good fallback is some kind of video simulator or something like that. Most of you, if you go to any of the big cities, your $5 million shooting range, almost every city has one. It's going to have some kind of video simulator there. But you've got to show your mind the situation in which you actually plan to use the skills. Video simulators will kind of show the mind the environment and the circumstances. The great thing about force on force, if it's done well, is you'll be feeding your mind the nonverbals. You'll have actors displaying the pre-assault indicators. You'll be giving your mind the information it needs, because you have to remember that when split-second decisions are made, when we look at officers making decisions to use force, they're not waiting till they see the physical gun. They are making decisions to shoot or not to shoot based on the patterns of movement, because quite frankly, by the time you can identify the object in the hand, it's too late. If you were to wait to see the object, expressly see the object and identify it strongly, you'd be asking people to play Russian roulette. And in a lot of the situations these shootings occur in, they're in low light situations anyway. And in low light, everybody's legally blind. So, in the real world, people make decisions based on patterns much more so than explicit observations. And the force on force is a great way to learn which patterns you need to look for.
Well, and again, having seen a violent attack against you in a force-on-force scenario gives you that 0.25, 0.3, 0.4 advantage, right? I mean, that's what we're really getting at, is to be able to make that decision well before.
And it could be way more than that. It could be like a 10-second advantage. Yep. You could be walking. So imagine this scenario. You walked out of the grocery store at 11 o'clock at night, and the two guys that were kind of leaned up against the wall, you noticed on the way in, as you exit the store and your hands are kind of full and you would be easily distracted, they've been casually propped up against the side of the store. And all of a sudden, as you exit the store, they kind of push off the wall and they plot an intersect course with you. Well, you could do something as simple as go, oh, gee, look at the time. Let me turn back around. I forgot to get something from the store, right? And just walk inside. Well, you shortcut, you've made a great decision And you didn't even have to worry about shaving a quarter second or 3 seconds off your draw stroke. You're just like, yeah, I've seen this show before, and I'm just not going to play. And, for the armed citizen, just not playing is probably the best option. Unless you have loved ones to protect, not playing the game is the best way to win.
Absolutely, which is, you mentioned Craig Douglas's muck, managing unknown contacts, picking up on pre-assault cues. I mean, that I tell this story quite often, but I think it bears mentioning again. When I first hosted Craig in Washington, my gym that we were training at, they're making a bunch of noise, and I'll tell the short version of this story. They're making a ton of noise during the muck lectures and training, and Craig says, Eric, you go square that shit away. This is the most important portion of this class. And that stuck out to me big time. And it is. I mean, I've used muck. I can't count how many times. I had an instant just like that in, I was going to say Casa Grande, but it was actually in California. I'm forgetting the daggum town. Anyway, inconsequential. I had a very similar situation where the guy looked apart and he made a beeline across a parking lot towards me. And I picked it up and I looked at it. Hey, buddy, can't help you. And it startled him. He walked the other direction. I don't know if he was malignant or benign, but it certainly seemed like he had picked me out for some reason. And that's all it took, a good raised fence. And I just told him, I can't help you. And he walked off.
And, there's some things that a lot of people don't realize. So, for instance, the guys that aggressively panhandle during the day, a lot of times they're panhandling to get a little bit of cash, but they're also working on, they're working on their counter muck skills. So that same guy that's aggressively panhandling in the day may be sticking a screwdriver in your side at night using the skills that he's honed.
Very good.
And
Wow.
that ability to muck and recognize trouble coming in, and just most of these times these guys are looking for somebody with their head buried in their cell phone. They're not going to fight them. They're going to be an easy payday. An easy payday is you're not paying attention or you're a rich target. Either one of those work. They're looking for an easy payday. And if there's any doubt at all, they'll just wait for somebody else to come along, right? Your job is just not to be that someone that comes along. And, our dear departed friend, William April, he joked that, he said, if you just walk out of the store and kind of sit here and put your hand over your head and scan around the parking lot, whether you're looking or not, to the average criminal, that guy is actually paying attention. He might be able to identify me. And probably 90% of the time, that's enough. That just is enough to make that bad guy form that restraining judgment and just wait for the next person, which, sadly in our world, we count that as a victory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And man, we miss William for sure. And I remember hearing him say that one time. It's like, man, that's brilliant. Just look
the way I heard it, he said that these criminals say, when there is a doubt, there is no doubt. Move on to the next person. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember where it was. It was 29 Palms was where I was at. And yeah, so I was like, man, where in the heck was that? But I just remembered. Let's take a minute to talk about Origin. Origin supports us on the path. To quote Jocko, if you listen, then you know. They produce the best jiu-jitsu gis on the market, rash guards, spats, and Jocko Fuel supplements. They make t-shirts, hoodies, leather boots, and belts, with all their products made in the USA by U.S. workers, bringing manufacturing back. If you're interested in any of these Origin products, please go to our show notes and click on the affiliate link. You can also find our affiliate link on our website, evosec.org, in our blog page. Also use EVOSEC10 at checkout for 10% off. Well, John, I would like to give our audience a couple of examples. We spoke highly about ECQC. It's very physical, but you don't necessarily have to take a course that's that physical. We mentioned Carl Wren's courses, and Aaron and I, that's on the top of our list this year too, because I want to kind of move into a few more force on force opportunities that aren't just like the ECQC, kind of break it up a little bit. But for our audience out there that's a little bit timid towards getting super physical, classes like Carl Wren's can be an alternative, right?
Oh, absolutely. That good force. Unfortunately, it's like, this is what we need to remember is that when we go back to that kind of that flow charty thing of like, how bad is this? Is everybody thinks about risk of death or serious bodily injury, but risk to the ego is just as bad. So, for those guys that are really wavering on the fence and stuff like that, a lot of that waver isn't, fear of injury. It's damage to the ego. And you just have to get over that if you really, really want to be prepared for this. I mean, the only way you're going to find out where the holes in your game are is to have holes poked in your game. And, I can't remember if it was on this podcast or another one, Craig said that I called him the king of the emotional bookmark. Well, emotional bookmarks, you can think of those as emotional memories. Those are the things you're never, ever going to forget. If you go to a Craig Douglas class, you're never, ever going to forget getting shot in the crotch multiple times by your own gun. Those are things that are going to stick with you. And, that need to control the limb closest to the gun is learned pretty well after that moment. It's kind of like, the burned hand test teaches best approach. And, I would point out that we just said it teaches best. So, get your ego off the line, have an open mind, and go and learn.
Yeah, that very, very good and very important explanation. Ego is a big issue when it comes to a lot of this. And
I know for sure.
We want to change.
Even me asking people to do something as simple as come and take one of my, medium level pistol courses. No one wants to show me that they can't shoot as well as they've put on. People really don't want to show up and get punched in the face and realize they don't like it too much, and then everybody around them sees them get punched in the face and lose control, and then again get their gun taken away. Man, I'm just thankful. For some reason, I don't have an ego in that sense. I don't know if I really don't. I don't care about losing stuff. I don't care about getting tapped out in jiu-jitsu. I just want to learn from it. But it is just so interesting how ego, I bet you it self-selects out 80% of the people that would possibly get this kind of training.
Well, I think, the example I love to use of this is, for some reason, ever since I've had kids, I do a lot less competition shooting, right? But back when I had a little more free time, I would go and I would shoot a local USPSA match. And there would be a bunch of people there. And they also, like every fifth Saturday, they ran an all-steel match. It was very much, USPSA rules, but every target was steel. And when I show up for the steel match, which I'm thinking this is going to be the best thing ever, there's a third of the people there. Like literally 66% of the people have decided not to show up. And I ask the match director, I'm like, okay, why is nobody here? And he goes, well, it's really simple. When we shoot paper, nobody can tell whether you're hitting or not. When we come here and we shoot steel, everybody can tell whether you're hitting or not. And people just opt not to show up for that.
Interesting.
Well, that's another.
I guess I could see that.
And that's another good example I wasn't thinking about is how often you ask someone just to show up to the local IDPA match or USPSA. I mean, no matter how many times you tell them, all the people there want you there. They don't care if you miss all the targets or if you smoke them. They just want you there. People just don't. They just can't take themselves through that ego.
And again, like we spoke on earlier, all the different opportunities to add cognitive load on you. I mean, a match is another way to do it. I mean, it's just one more opportunity to put yourself under some stress, some peer pressure stress, and make some decisions with the gun in your hand.
Yeah, I mean, the puzzle is right there in front of you, but you still have to put that puzzle together, and, you still have a handful of permutations that you can put that puzzle together, but you're still thinking, and all of us that compete quite a bit, we aren't thinking about the shooting much at all. Every now and then we may say, okay, let me slow this down a little bit and focus on my front sight for this shot. But the rest of the time, we're just running around shooting the targets and then thinking about how we're going to get into cover position right away on the next shot. So.
Well, John, we're getting closer towards the end of the show and getting to a couple of other fun questions, but I wanted to give you an opportunity because I'm interested in this class as well. You know, there's been the use of the carbine, especially say with the Rittenhouse shooting and whatnot. The use of the carbine for civilians isn't likely what most people see it's going to be. And can you talk about your class, the short range carbine? Because I'm definitely interested in that myself.
So that has, I guess, 2 points I'd make there. So first off, I come from the Tom Givens line of long gun usage, right? One thing that Tom does great is he has for lack of a better word, a stripped down shotgun course that is everything the home defender needs to know in a day to use the shotgun to defend their house and loved ones. It's not everything you need to know to do with the shotgun. There's no slug select drills. There's other, spots that aren't covered, but it's like a very immersive 1-day class. How do I use this thing to save my life? And I got very good through teaching at work. We don't have unlimited budgets. We don't have unlimited ammo. I've gotten very good in my mind about tuning people up to use the carbine in the envelope where it's most likely to be used. And I like to think I can get people tuned up pretty good. And, inevitably it's like, twice now I've been tasked to do carbine classes at TACCON because, somebody had a family emergency or, somebody chickened out or something like that. So, I'd like to think I'm pretty good about taking somebody and teaching, just like I was going to, give you a quick lesson with the shotgun in a day, how to use the carbine in a day format. Now, is it everything you need to know how to do with a rifle? No, of course not. But it's how to use that rifle in the context that it's most likely to be used in realistically. And we were talking about competition and, I hate to tell you how cool I was and stuff like that, but I was shooting PCC in like 2006 because I figured out a long time ago, if I get in a carbine fight and, continental United States, whether I'm law enforcement or, home defender, it's going to look a lot more like an IDPA match than it's going to be a Camp Perry match. And I was, that's one of the few ways I loathe IDPA in some ways because I don't like to have this huge social event that takes 8 hours to get through. But I found if I took 2 guns, it made the time investment worthwhile, right? So I would go and I'd shoot the match with my handgun as a primary, and then I'd run the exact same stage with my carbine. And it's that kind of close range, it's that proximity. The carbine has 2 real factors you have to address, which is the manual safety and the sight offset, right? The bore offset. And most people don't bother to do that. And like I said, I think I've, from teaching at work, I've, in my day job, I've traveled, I drove 16 hours one way, 16 hours the other way to go and teach one of our tactical teams short range carbine use. I've done that, traveled to Virginia, that sort of a thing. So it's one of those things that I think I'm pretty good at. Not trying to toot my own horn, but it's, I've learned the methodologies that work best, and it's not a very high round count class. You don't have to, we're not going to blast 1,000 rounds. If I can't show you how to defend yourself with that carbine in 200 or 300 rounds, I would suggest that I'm not that good of an instructor. So the short range carbine just focuses on using the carbine in the context where it's most likely to be needed and trying to get you up to speed with the critical skills as quickly as possible.
Well, we're most assuredly, even in our classes, and again, I'm going to say that we got a lot of our ideas on how we would build our classes from Carl Wren. How he has the building block classes, and I'm certainly fascinated by how much work can be done in 4 to 8 hours, because it's a gateway drug for a lot of people. A lot of folks aren't willing to go to a 3 or a 2 day class, but you tell them 4 hours or even just 8 hours, and I think especially those of us that really are just local or regional instructors, that you're going to get more clients that way. So now, you being more of a national instructor, that's why I was really fascinated to see you doing that carbine course like that. I was curious about it.
So how long is
another one?
How long is that class? Maybe I missed when you said it.
Yeah, it's a 1 day class.
Got it. Awesome.
Yeah, I imagine you can show a lot in 8 hours, I'm sure. And like you said, a lot of folks don't realize that 8 hours can show you a lot with a carbine. That's awesome. Well, Aaron, what do you think, man? You think we should start moving into some of your favorite questions?
Sure. Well, this is the most important question on our show, John. So, what are your 3 favorite musicians and or bands?
So that's an interesting question. I know I was going to be asked this, and I can deliver the cool guy answer. I can give you the honest answer. And you have to remember, I'm the guy that years ago at the Red Meat Eating Carnivore Conference, we were all sitting around the bar. I made the horrible mistake, and I think your friend Mike Brown can tell this story of ordering a glass of red wine. Right? It didn't matter how many bourbons neat you drink after having a glass of red wine. They're never going to forgive you for this. So let me be honest about my 3 favorite bands. So in no particular order, I was born and raised in the 80s. So I would have to go, my best 80s band is Van Halen, with slight runner-up to Motley Crue. I never saw Van Halen in concert, but I saw the Crue in concert. And that would be my number 1 choice. It's probably Van Halen with, a parentheses there and with the Crue, right? Number 2 is Lyle Lovett. I've absolutely seen him in concert. His music speaks to me. So Lyle Lovett would be my number 2. And because myself and my dear departed friend Paul Gomez would admit this as well, I would have to go with my 3rd choice is the Indigo Girls. A couple of their albums just speak to me, and it is just phenomenal emotional music. And so I'd have to go with those. I know I'll be ridiculed for the remainder of my life, and but those are my answers, and I'm standing by them.
Amazing answers. And let me just say, my favorite tune from the Indigo Girls is, I believe it's just called Galileo.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Man, great song. But it's funny. I'm a rocker, of course. My favorite band is the Foo Fighters, and I started playing guitar because of Metallica. But I've got I may have a little extra estrogen sometimes because I'm a huge Sheryl Crow fan, and Sarah McLachlan.
Dude, and I saw Sarah McLachlan in concert in mid-90s, and that was phenomenal. I knew she could, she had popular music. I didn't know she could sing. She got on just the piano by herself, almost a cappella, and I was just you were just sitting there absolutely amazed. So she was actually a close runners-up, but I wasn't willing to go quite that deep. The other great thing I'll say about the Indigo Girls, if you want to deliver cognitive dissonance in the public, having your windows down, playing the Indigo Girls from a marked law enforcement vehicle will utterly baffle the public.
Awesome. Yeah, especially if people know much about the Indigo Girls. But that's excellent. Yeah.
Now, those are great answers, John, and you won't hear ridicule from us. And frankly, when we hear unique answers from guys like yourself, that we look up to from a lot of what we've learned, we kind of expect answers like that.
Well, I'll just share one cool story. I got to see Lyle Lovett, I think, in one of his last big concerts, 99. And I had actually worked in the Las Vegas Hilton for a while. So I was actually behind the scenes, and I ran across Lyle as he was getting in an elevator. And I had the most gushing, and dude, I know you don't know me. I just want to appreciate your music. It just touches me. It just means so much. I really appreciate everything you've done. And just kind of thanked him. And he didn't look at me like a freak. He's like, well, no, thank you. I appreciate that. And it was just, felt like I was talking to a human being, not a personality. So I remember that moment very clearly.
Very cool.
You didn't just start yelling and, I want to party with you, man.
No, dude, it's just there's certain, and I think it's the Indigo Girls, that. There's genuine emotion in those songs. And every once in a while I have emotions. What can I say? It's a failure of mine.
Hey, music is about emotion for sure. For sure. Or else I remember as a young kid having the emotional draw to music, and a little did I know that I would at least make a semi-career out of it. And now these days I like to call myself a professional musician that moonlights as an accountant. So, but
you got to have something to support the music habit, man.
Oh,
and that's, go ahead.
I was just going to say that right after I met my wife, before we got married, I was gigging a lot, and 5 nights a week, and I would do some touring with some fairly decent national acts, and one of the guitar players said, Aaron, we're going to have to go platinum. If people don't know what that means 1 million records. Aaron, we're going to have to go platinum to break even on this album. And I literally thought, okay, this is not for me. I'm not going to put my wife, this wonderful girl that I'm about to marry, I'm not going to put her through living off of of a musician. So lots of people can make it as a musician, but it's just even semi-famous or famous people, I mean, it's hard work. So I get to have my cake and eat it too, and I wouldn't have now 6 one-off custom guitars and one-off amps if I didn't have an accounting job.
Yeah, and again, you know, the fact that this podcast also lets Aaron and I have a music outlet together, even from a distance, has also been a real cool aspect of this show for sure. A lot of fun. Yeah, and we grew up in the 80s. I meant to mention that too. So, man, we love 80s music too. I turn on 80s music on Pandora all the time now.
I have a whole playlist in YouTube, and you know, I only half jokingly call it white trash because, you know, like it's Motley Crue, and you know, it's all the good white trash hair bands of the 80s, man. It's some good tunes that bring back some good memories.
Okay, let me put you on the spot. This is one more question, red wine kind of question. Do you like Winger?
No, not particularly, dude.
Man,
it's not one of those bands that really pops out to me.
Oh, Kip,
she's only 17.
Yeah,
I had a thing for Kip Winger. He's pretty cute. Nah, the guitar player Red Beach was pretty amazing, but I just wanted to see if I could catch him.
I think we've mentioned this before. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saying I was going to see if I could catch him with if he liked Winger like I do. Boy, Mike Brown would never let that down.
Yep.
Well, but
we'll just mention on the. Well, I'll just mention it on the air. Mike might want to choke me out now that, but I seem to recall when myself, he and Brian Hill, and I'm remiss. I forget. He was an FBI agent. We were going to Kansas for the Kansas State IDPA match, and I seem to recall over and over again Mike playing "Genie in a Bottle" by Christine Aguilera. So we'll just put that out on the air.
Bro, are you serious?
Yes, I am.
Wow. Okay.
You know,
did Mike give you hard
guys that you just really can't.
Exactly. Yep. The Cornell graduates, you know. Well, was he the one giving you a hard time about the red wine?
Oh, dude, to this day. That happened in probably 2005, and I still get harassment over that decision.
Wow. Well, we'll probably get a text about it too when he listens to this show. Well, I'm amazed that my Chinese cold virus voice has held out okay. But John, thanks so much for coming on the show. Can you go ahead and give everybody a place where they can get a hold of you, and wherever that is? Eric is really good about putting that stuff in our show notes too.
All right, so I have the training company is 2 Pillars Training, and I have the URL bought. I just have to move the website over there. Right now, the website is under jhearne.com. That's JHEARNE.com. And when the new website gets up, it'll forward you there automatically. But all my classes are there. Because of family commitments, I'm pretty much on the road only 1 weekend a month. But I'm pretty much almost booked up for 2022. The 2-day version of Cognitive Pistol is rolling out, and that's a really, really different and fun class for a lot of people. I never knew that my niche market was going to be ER physicians, but like I literally had 4 doctors in the last class, and that class is a hard cap of 12. 3 of them were ER docs in a major crime-ridden metropolitan area, and they absolutely loved the class. So that's when I knew I was on the right track. So go to the website.
Awesome.
All that information will be there.
We need to get into your Cognitive Pistol, so Aaron and I will be looking at our schedules, and we'll get into that.
I'm going to be at Meat Hall in November. That's already booked. So.
Oh,
okay.
But you said it's capped out.
Well, no, it has a limit of 12. We haven't started selling tickets yet. That's pretty far
Eric,
out.
that's in OKC, brother.
Yeah, well, maybe we can make that happen then. if it doesn't sell out. So, well, awesome, John. Again, I'll say thank you as well. You know, guys like you, we like to have back if you're available and would like to another time. So, we would certainly like to do that.
Yeah. And if I could just ping out one more thing here. So, you know, one of the things that I do that's different from a lot of people is I can teach a really good shooting class, and I'm also a pretty effective lecturer. One of the things I've pretty much had to move into since William left us, and, you know, I'm not trying to replace William. I'm trying to compliment William. I consider him a dear friend. He was in my wedding party. If you attend my the criminal lecture I'm about to mention, you'll see I've got a picture of him grabbing my crotch. So we were pretty close back in the day. But I wrote out a pretty solid 8-hour class on understanding and defeating violent criminals, where we spend the first half of the class looking at criminals, crime in America, victim selection. And then for the last, the afternoon, we used New Hall and Miami as case studies for that. So that's something I just ran the first full version of that at Carl's, and it was very, very well received. So that's the other thing that I would offer, you know, is that I can do the 8-hour lecture, 9-hour lecture on human performance. I can talk about crime and criminals, or I can teach you to run a gun pretty well.
And all of that you mentioned there, that is deeply important for folks to understand. So, yeah, they need to seek you out for those courses for sure. Well, guys, I guess it's about that time to say goodnight. It's been a good time for sure. It's always great hanging out with both like-minded people and folks that we love to learn from, John. So thanks a lot, buddy.
All right. Glad to be of service, guys. Anytime you let me know.
All right.
All right.
Good evening.
Have a good one.